Thank you. Namaste. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night.
Yes, good day. Good to be here with Dr. Svoboda. And as we know, at least, these half-hour webinars really fly by. So I'm going to jump right into it. But first, I want to thank Dr. Svoboda for being here and thank Paula for supporting us to do this and welcoming everybody and organizing. And so to jump into it, we are in about just a few weeks actually going to be doing our second part of Ayurveda and the Microbiome that we started in June. June was more of a kind of overview of a very vast subject and lots of interconnections with Ayurveda. And so this will be part two. In part two, we're going to go into the specifically more of the relationship between the gut and you could say brain, cognition, emotion, because that is maybe the most significant aspect of the microbiome because it really influences our moment-to-moment experience. And so a couple of facts that are, I think, really good to get our webinar started in a way to frame a context are that the World Health Organization estimates that by 2032, anxiety and depression will be the #1 health issue on the planet. And I think that during this time of the pandemic, it's likely that that might be the case already. Um, it's also interesting and important to note that in the context of mental health issues, mood issues like anxiety and depression, these are considered to be non-communicable diseases. And that goes along with everything like heart disease to certain kinds of autoimmune disease, in the sense to say that these experiences are largely preventable. Not always, especially because of the nature of trauma and the way that our emotional brain is structured and the way that we actually process the traumas that we carry, but more in the sense to say that we know that diet and lifestyle and our dietary experience and our life experience have a very big influence on these. And so one of the factors that has become more significant is the question of how the microbiome is influencing our mood. And there's really incredible support out there. There's a lot of solid scientific evidence that this is the case. And just to give one more data point before I'll turn it over to Dr. Svoboda, there was an Israeli study, I believe it was in 2018 or might have been 2019, that was able to show with human patients, which is always the gold standard for research, is to have humans be the ones that are being observed and measured, was that having just one round of antibiotics in a year would increase somebody's likelihood of having a major depression episode by 24%, as well as and the possibility for a major anxiety episode or pattern to develop for that person by 17%. And then they found that if you have more antibiotics, like say you had 2 rounds of antibiotics, that would actually double the risk. And so this is shocking, and it's also a little bit overwhelming to imagine how that is true, but this is part of what's motivating us to do this course, is that you actually have a lot of power and you have a lot of ways that you can utilize the things in your world and in your life to help support yourself. And even if you do have to have antibiotics, because by no means are we saying that you shouldn't take antibiotics when they're absolutely necessary, but there is side effects that if we're aware of them, we can more successfully balance and mitigate the negatives. And so, so Dr. Svoboda, do you have anything to add to that or from the Ayurvedic perspective?
Well, I mean, I do, but even from the modern perspective, I think I think we should emphasize here that correlation is not causation. So it's quite possible that people who needed to have antibiotics needed to do so because they were already in moving in the direction of being anxious or depressed, and that's why they that's why an alien microbe was able to take them over. And there could be other reasons for that also. I think that this certainly suggests that more research is needed to evaluate more accurately exactly what effect antibiotics are having on the microbiome. But even more important to me, at least, it displays all the more clearly evidence for a principle that is very, very fundamental to Ayurveda, and that's the principle of rasa in general, and the connection between the juices in the body, because rasa means juice, and the emotions in the mind, because rasa are connected by six, as rasa is taste. So the body chemistry, our experience of taste itself, and our experience of emotion, these three are all immutably linked. And so one thing that we have to be able to evaluate is how they are linked. And the basis of this linkage is very much the sweet taste. And the sweet taste is the most important of all the tastes, because it's the one that provides the water and earth element that we need for building up the body. The body is always building up and tearing down at the same time, but it's always trying to build up more because it has a positive desire to remain integrated in the physical world. So there's always a desire to build up. That's what the sweet taste does. And if it were that simple, that you just eat things that are sweet, then everybody in the world who's eating 20 and 30 teaspoons of sugar a day would be in great shape. But it's not as important. It is very important what the taste of your food is, but it's even more important what is the taste of the food once it gets into the tissues. And so that's all part of the process. As a result, the taste that gets into the tissues happens or is manifested as a result of digestion. So that's where the microbiome comes in. The microbiome is very much in charge of determining whether what you take in is going to be able to healthfully nourish your tissues, or whether it is going to provide undesirable results for your tissues. And those undesirable results will be transmitted to your brain. Your tissues will tell you we're not satisfied, then you won't be satisfied. And then there is also the influence of the food, the taste of the food, and the qualities of the food you take in, and whether the microbiome is satisfied. So it's not just a case of whether your tissues and your mind are satisfied. It has to be the tissues, the mind, and the microbiome. All three of these are interacting with one another all the time. And that's something that we're going to explore in some detail during the course. Because, of course, the Ayurveda, the principle of Ayurveda is that everything that's manifested in the world is manifested from consciousness, that the singularity from which the universe was created was the singularity of Satchidananda, of pure consciousness with no qualities. And therefore, there is consciousness in everything. And that consciousness that is in everything is always interacting with the consciousness in everything else. So there is very definitely not only consciousness, but memory, not only in our brains and our minds, but in our tissues and in the microbiome. And so it's not just a matter of eating right today and having everything become great, because your body has and your microbiome and your brain, they all have memories of what's been happening already. So we have to work not only with what we are what we're eating now, but the effects of what we have eaten before. So, and having the right food and the right attitude, these are both very important, because even if the food is very good, and even if in all of the Ayurvedic texts that says the food is all great and what have you, if you and the food are not interacting properly, it will either give you no good result or it will give you a bad result. Even if it is something as simple as grita, otherwise known as ghee. Don't you agree, Dr. Scott?
I very much do. And this idea is, again, something that has been in Ayurveda, but it actually, as it's being sort of, as parallel discoveries are emerging from the field of the microbiome, one of the ways that you could look at this is through the lens of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the primary nerve that's associated with our fight or flight, rest and digest nervous system, otherwise known as the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system as a system has sort of its primary job is to search the environment via our senses, and then the way those senses are turned inwardly to monitor our physiology, as well as they're turned outwardly to monitor the macro environment that we live in. That they are they're always seeking to answer the question, am I safe? That's the primary question, because if the answer is no, then you're going to put a lot of things on hold until you can satisfy yourself that you are safe again. And these are, very important things like resting, rejuvenating, digesting, which is going to imply assimilating nutrients, which is going to imply supplying the basic building blocks for all of the ways that your body regulates itself, maintains its homeostatic balance, maintains its vitality and its balance. And so we had the good fortune of having a conversation, Dr. Svoboda and I, with Dr. Stephen Porges. And Dr. Porges is very well known in certain circles because of the polyvagal theory, of which he was one of the you could say founders of this theory, or the originator of this theory. And he's spent decades now researching and developing more nuanced understandings of how the polyvagal, vagal there implying the vagus nerve, and poly meaning many, the polyvagal nature of the human being and other life forms, or other species as well, function. And when we had this conversation, one of the pieces that he really, really focused on was something called he called cues of safety. And it's as straightforward as it sounds at one level, which is that we're always looking outwardly and inwardly for cues of safety. And so if, for example, you had the most sattvic meal prepared for you, but you were asked to eat it on a freeway median, or you were asked to eat it in the middle of a volleyball game, or you were asked to eat it at a dinner table that was filled with strife and discord because you started talking about politics or some other highly charged subject, you would probably not be able to utilize all of that goodness that was present in the kind of inherent qualities of the food, because the qualities on the inside were actually not in a position to be even interested in trying to digest food, because you would be distracted, and rightfully so, by trying to find a better environment where you could actually relax, you could actually get into a space where your interest and your enjoyment and your digestion of food was possible. And so this is one of the key things, is you could imagine that. I think it's very easy to imagine when, as humans, we're not feeling comfortable, but it's also, there's an a parallel for your microbiome. The microbes in your microbiome are doing exactly the same thing. And this is one of the reasons why there are many organisms that simply have a very simple nervous system, primarily to support their digestive system. And it's not to say that your digestive system is more important than your brain, but they are very much partners in your survival. And so if you're encountering foods that have been saturated with pesticides or with lots of food additives, or have had the fiber processed out of them, or are spoiled in some way, or have hydrogenated oils that are rancid that are added to them as part of the cheap way of producing them, that likely what will happen is, as those foods, no matter what they taste like on your tongue, as they arrive in your gut, your microbiome will be either malnourished, undernourished, or actually exposed to something that's toxic to them, like an antibiotic or a pesticide, and that would set off the alarm bells for the microbial community. So they're going to go into their own pattern of feeling unsafe. And so, and that this is a very profound uh, kind of parallel aspect of who you are, or if you're eating foods in a way, or the food itself is tainted in some way, it can set off the stress response in your microbiome, and that is not going to be limited to that area. So you're going to be experiencing the signaling of that distress from your microbiome quite profoundly, because of the nature of the way that your nervous system is structured. And I think, Dr. Svoboda, would you like to help sort of enlighten us a little more about how profoundly entrenched the communication system is between the microbiome and the brain?
I would indeed. And that involves the important fact that the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body, the vagus nerve snakes all the way down into the gut. It also influences the heart. But most, meaning 80%, the large majority of its fibers are efferent. There are two types of fibers, nerve fibers. One is efferent, and the efferent with an E, those fibers are sending messages from the brain telling the parts of the body to do things. Afferent with an A, afferent nerves are accepting messages from the body, finding out what's going on in the body. So 80% of the messages that get transmitted by the vagus nerve, 80% are going from the body, and that means mostly from the gut, but also the heart, going from the body into the brain. And they're going from the body via the heart into the brain. So they have an opportunity to affect the heart, which is an important seat of emotion and is also the seat from which prana, via the type of vayu called vyana, is circulated throughout the entire body. So the messages from the vagus nerve, 80%, are headed towards the brain. They have a chance to influence the heart. They have a chance to influence other organs, and they get to the brain and they influence the brain very strongly. So it's very useful to remember that we have three major brains in the body. There is the most major brain, that is the brain that's inside your skull, that has 100 billion, with a B, neurons in it. And then we have the brain in the gut, which has 500 million neurons in it, with an M, and the brain in the spinal cord, which only has 100 million neurons in it. Now, the number is not necessarily does not necessarily characterize importance, though it is noteworthy that we have 5 times as many neurons in the gut as we do in the spinal cord. Both of those numbers are much less than the numbers in the brain. But because the vagus nerve is mainly sending rather than receiving messages from the gut, that means a lot of that computation that's happening up in the brain is happening because of what the vagus nerve is picking up in the gut. So a lot of it is happening from what we are taking in through our senses from the external world, but a large amount of it is coming from what the brain is, the information that the brain is getting from the gut via the vagus nerve. So this is a specific example of a principle that we refer to in Ayurveda as the principle of Vata, but in particular, Vata in its positive physiological role. There is in the Charaka Samhita, there is a statement. It's very simple, but it unpacking it provides an excellent opportunity to understand, provide a fundamental understanding of how parts of your system are put together, and that is this tantra, tantra, daraha. So Vayu means prana plus vata. Vayu means it's the air element. It's the force that moves things around in your body. So that's what it mainly does. But in this particular case, what it's saying is Vayus tantra daraha. Daraha means supporter of, the thing that provides support to. Tantra means all of the physiological processes in the body. Tantra means a process. Yantra means all of the structures in the body. So Vayu, Vata, Prana, supports all of the physiological processes and all of the structures in the body, which means it supports everything. And it supports that by means of the blood circulating, the lymph circulating, the nervous information circulating, the prana circulating. We're able to stay in one piece because we have all of this moving all the time. Everything, the force of the air element is moving all of the time. When it stops moving, everything comes to a halt, including life. So Vata is in control very much of everything that happens in the organism. When Vata is minimized, it's doing its job, being thrown out of the body by talking, by urinating, by defecating, by whatever it is that we're doing, that active Vata, and we call it Vata because it has to be used at that moment. It can't be stored anymore. Prana can be stored. Prana is something that that moves much more slowly, moves much more deeply, and gives us a feeling of strength and protection. So safety comes when you feel well protected. So when the body feels protected, when the mind feels protected, and the microbiome all feel protected, they feel protected because they have this sense that prana is in charge, that prana is doing its job properly and making sure that nothing can come and disturb all of these processes and all of these tissues, all of these structures. What happens when Vata becomes stronger is that there is not that sense of support. There is not that sense of protection. There's a sense that sometimes there will be more activity than is appropriate. Sometimes that activity will be insufficient. And that's when that concept of safety starts to become compromised. When you have a certain confidence that is in the body, we're talking about the body now, when the body has a sense of confidence that there is not going to be some unpleasant surprise, then it will have a feeling that it is protected. When you're always wondering what's going to happen next, where is the next danger going to emerge from, then you do not have a sense of being well protected. Then you don't have a sense of being safe. And then you will start to behave in ways that are not going to promote the overall health of the organism. You will start to behave in ways that will promote what you think is your best chance for being yourself protected. So if the microbiome does that, it will change the way in which all of the different constituents of it interact with one another. It will send messages along the vagus nerve to the brain saying, we're uneasy, we're not confident, we don't know what's going to happen next. And the brain will send messages back and to the body, and there will now be a disturbance not only in the physiology, but also in the emotion, because now there is anxiety, perhaps there is open fear. And there will also be a disturbance in the tissues, because what happens when there's fear or anxiety is very similar to what happens when your body becomes very cold. It constricts. And when it constricts, that means there is a certain constriction in all of the different channels of circulation in your organism. And when that constriction is there, that means the prana cannot flow as freely as it was flowing before. And that means that there will be an even greater sense of lack of safety. There will be an even greater sense that there's no support, that there is no protection. And that will encourage anxiety to increase. And if you're not paying attention, then you may even start breathing very shallowly and very quickly. And that will make the situation even worse. So because there are these connections, things that are going well will tend to go better, and things that are going unwell will tend to go worse. So, and it's all under the control of Vata. It's all under the control of this force that is moving things, because information has to be moved to different parts of the body. And information is what's being moved. It's not necessarily necessary that we move neurotransmitters from the gut into the brain to have an effect on the brain. If we have these neurotransmitters acting on the nerves in the gut, and the vagus nerve is taking those sensations, those nervous stimuli into the brain, then the brain is going to get the effect of the gut the effect of the condition of the gut is going to be transmitted directly into the brain. And that's going to have a very, very direct effect on how we as individuals experience our own reality. I am see that we're running out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Scott to bring things to a conclusion for today. And of course, I believe Dr. Scott will join me in hoping that all of you come back and attend our event, because we have a lot more to say.
Thank you. Thank you for that incredible explanation. And I think one way to kind of round, kind of come around to that and close things is to say that, we know for a fact that the way that we know that if we're under chronic stress, it has the potential to change our microbiomes. That's a fact. That's a scientific fact. So there's this mutual modification going on between the gut and the brain at all times. And that the good news is that the practical, very, very practical sciences of Ayurveda and yoga have been well studied by actually Dr. Porges himself in the polyvagal theory, that things like posture and breathing and the way you vocalize, because the vagus nerve actually has a major effect on the larynx, and not only the capacity physically to speak, but actually the way that we form our thoughts and feelings. And so as well as the ethics and the behavior, the way we conduct ourselves in relationship to others, and not only other humans, but animals, plants, and then the natural world that we may perceive as inanimate, that all of these are outlined in Ayurveda and yogic practices. So as we go into this course, we're going to be talking about some big ideas, but also really grounding it in practices from Ayurveda, practices from yoga that are in many ways a brilliant they reflect a brilliant understanding of the truths that are revealed by the microbiome research and the way that we have a lot of power to influence those things positively. So I really look forward to joining Dr. Svoboda. And Toby's asking how to join the course. We have, I think Paula will give the link, and if not, it will be published on our mutual websites and over some of the social media platforms, so people can join. And there it is. Thanks, Paula. And I'm sorry that we didn't have time to get to all, any of the questions, but, I'm looking at a few of the questions here, and, the FODMAP question, we will note these and take them with us into this course. And the FODMAP question it's a big one. And it's something I would almost say that FODMAP, because I have had a lot of patients over the years who have used that, that have required that kind of diet. It seems to me that it's some kind of dysbiosis, whether it's more yeast or fungus based, or it's actually the bacterial microbes that are out of balance, but that the FODMAP diet helps to modify the microbiome in a more positive and balanced direction. And then somebody asked about watching a wholesome movie while eating. It's one of those things, if you're really relaxed and the movie is like having a conversation with a good friend that soothes you and makes you feel good, then it's probably fine. Horror movies and eating maybe might be harder to justify. And then the Eric's question is a little more is big. It's a big question about the cleanup for Gaia, but I do think that there is a very simple yes to the fact that our microbiome is a reflection of the macrobiome, and many of the problems that we're discovering about the way we're treating the macrobiome are helping to explain why the microbiome is struggling to find its own balance these days. And so, and then Tara, yeah, go ahead, Robert.
And yes, we did not mention the heart today because we had 30 minutes. So we are most certainly going to mention the heart and its neurons and how those neurons interact with the vagus nerve. Yes, that will be part of the experience.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to be sort of organizing it around the principle of rasa and the taste. We'll be organizing it around vata, dosha, and the vagus nerve, and then we'll be organizing it around the three mahagunas in terms of the influence on our minds and emotions. And so the heart will be actually included in all three of those sections.
All three.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And again, thank you to Paula, and thank you, Dr. Svoboda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.